where are you watching this from? Tell me your city, your age, the time on your clock right now. Do you like stories of vengeance? Stories wrapped in history? Stories whispered in blood and silence? If you do, subscribe now, because tonight's story is one of fire, memory, and the taste of death served on a master's table. September 17th, 1851. Southampton County, Virginia. The tobacco barns smoked with harvest. The corn was stacked, the cotton fields wide as oceans. The harvest moon was rising swollen and pale, a lantern that looked down on blood, waiting to spill. That night, a name carried through the quarters like smoke. Sarah, the slave called Sarah. Sarah was 22, born into bondage, raised in sweat and silence. She had eyes like dark rivers, deep and unreadable. Her back bore the faint ridges of lashes. Old scars laid across her like handwriting from overseers who thought pain was their language. She cooked, she carried, she bent her head low. They thought she was nothing more than a servant. But Sarah was more. She was a ledger of memory. Each wound a number, each insult a debt. 7 overseers. Men with names, not shadows. William Price, John Talley, Rufus Hart, Thomas Gentry, Caleb Morgan, Isaac Drew, Benjamin Holt. Their boots stamped the soil. Their voices barked across the fields. Their whips cracked like lightning, falling on backs, on shoulders, on children. They thought their names meant power, but Sarah repeated those names like curses, like prayers. William, John, Rufus, Thomas, Caleb, Isaac, Benjamin. The harvest moon had always meant plenty, but in 1851 it meant reckoning. Sarah prepared her own harvest. She gathered herbs, roots, the bitter berries that grew where no one looked. She ground them into dust. She stirred them into broth. She carried vengeance in her apron. This is the story of Sarah of Virginia, the woman who poisoned 7 overseers during the harvest moon, the woman who fed death from the master's table, the woman who turned silence into fire. Before we continue with the video, drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time it is right now. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The morning was damp, dew clung to the fields. Smoke rose from the tobacco barns. The air smelled of wet hay, hog fat, and sweat. Chickens scratched outside the cabins, and the clank of chains could still be heard if you listened long enough. Sarah rose before the sun. She always did. The straw beneath her was damp. The walls of the cabin smelled of mold and smoke. She tied a strip of cloth around her head, smoothed her skirt, and stepped into the dirt that was not hers, but had carried her since birth. She walked to the kitchen house, her feet bare, the soil cold. Inside, the fire already crackled. Iron pots hissed with grease. The overseers would need their food. Not because Sarah wanted to feed them, but because she had no choice. She cut pork fat with a dull knife. She stirred beans. She baked cornbread. They thought the knife was for meat, the pot for hunger. But Sarah knew different. William Price leaned in the doorway sometimes, his face red, his eyes sharp with cruelty. He laughed too loud. He drank too much. His whip hung loose at his belt, always within reach. "Faster, girl," he barked, and Sarah bent her head lower. John Talley was quieter but crueler. He had eyes like glass, cold and unblinking. He struck without warning. Rufus Hart chewed tobacco, spitting brown stains near the door. Thomas Gentry sang as he lashed men, his voice high and cruel. Caleb Morgan walked with a limp, but swung his whip just the same. Isaac Drew liked to make the young boys run just to chase them down. Benjamin Holt was the youngest, eager to prove himself, laughing as he punished, eager to be noticed. Sarah remembered them all. Every man, every habit, every cruelty. The quarters whispered at night, about lashes, about lost children, about women taken in the dark. Sarah listened. She listened more than she spoke. They said she never cried. They said she never shouted. She just kept moving, her eyes deep, her silence heavy. But silence was not surrender. It was waiting. It was patience. Sarah had not always been this way. Once, there was laughter in her. Once, there was a girl with braids, with hands soft from youth. Once, there was a mother who hummed at night. Her mother's name was Ruth. Ruth, who braided her hair. Ruth, who pressed her cheek against her daughter's. Ruth, who was sold south when Sarah was 12. Sarah never saw her again. Ruth's name was a wound that never healed. There was also Elijah. He was young, quick, strong. He worked the horses, sang when he could. He carried water for Sarah once, smiled at her in the moonlight. Elijah tried to run in 1848. They caught him. They whipped him until his back split open. William Price held the whip that night. Elijah's blood splattered the dirt. He never walked right again. He died that winter. Sarah remembered every scream. There was Mary, a younger girl, barely 14. Thomas Gentry took her into the barn one night. She came back with torn clothes, with eyes empty as broken glass. She never spoke again. She wasted away. Sarah remembered her silence. The past was a garden of grief, each name a seed. Ruth, Elijah, Mary. They grew into roots that wrapped tight around Sarah's heart. She believed once in promises whispered by preachers who came to the quarters. Promises of deliverance, of heaven, of freedom. But the whip snapped louder than scripture. The overseers laughed at the word hope. They said it was a lie. The fields were endless. The rows stretched like chains to the horizon. Day after day, year after year, Sarah bent her back, blistered her hands, carried weight not her own. She watched children sold. She watched men beaten. She watched women broken. Every loss was a number, every insult a tally. Sarah kept count. The kitchen became her stage, the pots her tools, the food her offering. She cooked for them because she had to, but she watched them chew, swallow, laugh, spit bones. She studied the way they trusted her hands. That trust was a wound she turned into a weapon. She began to gather small things, berries from the ditch, leaves from the woods, roots bitter to the tongue. She asked quiet questions of an elder woman who knew herbs. They called it medicine, but Sarah wasn't making medicine. She was making memory into powder. Ruth's face came to her at night. Elijah's scream echoed in her ears. Mary's silence haunted her dreams. One for Ruth, one for Elijah, one for Mary, one for every lash, one for every scream, one for every silence. The final straw came in the heat of August. The corn stood tall, the sun unrelenting. Caleb Morgan struck a boy named Samuel for dropping an ear of corn. The boy was 10. The whip cut into his small back. He screamed until his voice broke. Sarah saw it. She stood still, a bowl of water in her hands, watching as Samuel fell to the dirt. His cries sounded like Elijah's, like every cry before. That night, Sarah sat in the dark of her cabin. She held a stone in her hand, grinding bitter roots until they turned to dust. Her arms ached. Her jaw was clenched. She did not cry. She did not pray. She just ground and ground, steady as the river. She hid the powder in a cloth. She tucked it in the corner of the kitchen. Every day she added more, slowly, quietly. No one noticed. The overseers drank. The overseers laughed. They never looked at her twice. Her silence became her mask. Her eyes gave nothing away. She served them food, bent her head, walked away. But inside, something had shifted. The victim had burned away. The hunter had risen. The harvest moon was coming. She chose that night, a night when the fields glowed silver, when the overseers would drink and eat in celebration of their harvest. They would feast, they would boast, and she would serve. She sharpened the knife, not for meat. She scrubbed the pot, not for stew. She prepared the table, not for comfort. Every object became a weapon, every action a step toward reckoning. The night came. The harvest moon rose fat and white above the barns. The fields shone silver. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, whiskey, and sweat. The overseers gathered in the kitchen, William Price at the head, loud and red-faced. John Talley, quiet and watchful. Rufus Hart spitting tobacco juice into the fire. Thomas Gentry humming under his breath. Caleb Morgan limping to his seat. Isaac Drew slapping Samuel on the head as he passed. Benjamin Holt grinning, eager. Sarah moved among them, silent, steady. Her hands did not tremble. She ladled stew into bowls. She cut bread. She poured whiskey. Her apron brushed against her legs. Her eyes stayed low. The powder dissolved into the stew, bitter but hidden. She stirred it smooth. She placed the bowls before them, one for William, one for John, one for Rufus, one for Thomas, one for Caleb, one for Isaac, one for Benjamin. 7 men, 7 debts. They ate. They laughed. They cursed. The fire cracked. Sarah stood in the corner, silent, watching. She remembered Ruth. She remembered Elijah. She remembered Mary. She remembered Samuel. Her heart beat steady as a drum. William Price laughed too loud, then choked. He clutched his throat. His face turned red, then purple. John Talley's eyes went wide, his spoon falling to the table. Rufus Hart spat brown juice mixed with blood. Thomas Gentry's song broke into a scream. Caleb Morgan collapsed against the bench. Isaac Drew clawed at his stomach. Benjamin Holt gasped, his grin gone. The kitchen filled with noise, choking, gasping, retching. Sarah did not move. She did not cry. She just watched. The overseers fell one by one. The harvest moon looked down through the window, pale and silent. The fire hissed. The smell of meat and bile filled the room. Their boots kicked the floor. Their hands clawed at nothing. Then silence. 7 men lay still. William, John, Rufus, Thomas, Caleb, Isaac, Benjamin. The names were quiet now. Sarah turned. She walked out into the night. The moonlight washed her face. She did not run. She did not shout. She just walked. The bodies were found before dawn. Panic spread across the plantation. Overseers dead, poison in their bellies. The master raged. The dogs were set loose. The enslaved whispered her name. Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. She did not flee. She stayed. They came for her with ropes and rifles. She stood still, her hands at her sides. She did not cry. She did not beg. She just looked at them, her eyes deep, unreadable. They dragged her to the yard. They tied her hands. The other enslaved watched from the shadows. The master shouted of vengeance. The overseers' bodies were carried away. The air stank of fear. They whipped her, but she did not scream. They struck her, but she did not bow. She carried silence like armor. In the end, they hanged her beneath the harvest moon. Her body swung in the night, but her silence remained heavier than any rope. The quarters whispered for years. The story spread down roads, across counties, carried in the mouths of the enslaved. Sarah who poisoned 7. Sarah who answered cruelty with silence turned deadly. Sarah who remembered. They called her a murderer. But in the quarters, they called her justice. Not because it ended slavery, not because it freed them, but because it proved silence could strike, because memory could become fire. Her name lived on, Sarah of Virginia, the woman who poisoned 7 overseers during the harvest moon of 1851. If this story chills you, it is because memory has teeth. If this story moves you, it is because silence is not surrender. It waits, it sharpens, it strikes. Subscribe and share with those who carry memory, with those who know silence, with those who understand that even in chains, resistance burns.